They say every man has a breaking point. I found mine the day my boss took everything I loved. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was quiet, calculated, almost beautiful in how perfectly it destroyed me. I used to think life broke people all at once, with a single tragedy or loss. But no, life breaks you piece by piece, until one day you wake up and realize there's nothing left of who you were. I remember the sound of that night, the rain, tapping against my car window, as I sat outside the office building, staring at the glowing sign that once filled me with pride. Coal Industries. I'd given 12 years of my life to that name, 12 years of loyalty, trust, and faith in a man I called my mentor. Inside those glass walls, I had built everything: my career, my friendships, my identity. And in one cruel twist of fate, all of it had been taken from me by the very man who promised to protect it. Before the storm, my life had been almost perfect. I had a beautiful wife, Emily, whose laughter could light up a room. 2 kids, Lily and Ethan, who thought their dad was a hero. A home filled with warmth, weekend barbecues, movie nights, and bedtime stories. My life wasn't extraordinary, but it was mine, and it was happy. Sometimes I still see flashes of those moments. Emily smiling at me from across the dinner table, Lily's little hand wrapped around my finger, Ethan running into my arms after work. Memories that feel like a lifetime ago. I used to believe that hard work was everything, that loyalty would protect you, that honesty would reward you. But life doesn't work like that, not in the corporate jungle, and not when men like Richard Cole are involved. He was my boss, my friend, and the man I trusted more than anyone outside my family. A man whose approval felt like success itself. But beneath that charming smile and those polished suits was something darker, ambition without a conscience. I didn't see it then, but looking back now, I realized the warning signs were always there. I should have known something was wrong the moment my ideas started, getting noticed not by me, but by him. I should have questioned why the man I worked so hard for suddenly started calling my wife beautiful, or why he began inviting us to dinner parties that felt more like tests than celebrations. But I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking, because that's what trust does. It blinds you. That night, sitting alone in my car, I replayed everything in my head. The projects I built that Richard took credit for. The long hours I worked, believing it would lead to a promotion that never came. The sudden coldness in Emily's voice when I came home late. It all connected like puzzle pieces I had refused to see. My downfall wasn't a single blow. It was a series of small betrayals that built up until the world I trusted crumbled beneath me. They say memories fade, but betrayal doesn't. It lingers like a scar that never heals. I can still see Richard's face, calm and smug, as he shook my hand in front of the boardroom after firing me for crimes I didn't commit. I can still hear Emily's voice, soft but trembling, telling me we needed time apart. I can still feel the way my son avoided my eyes that morning, confused by what he'd overheard from his mother. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just take your peace. It steals your identity. That night I didn't go home. I couldn't. I drove until the city lights disappeared behind me, until I was surrounded by silence and rain. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, a man I barely recognized. The loyal employee, the loving husband, the devoted father, all gone. What stared back at me was emptiness. And for a long time, I thought that was the end of my story. But I was wrong, because somewhere out there, fate had written a twist I could never have imagined. A secret buried deep in my family's past. One that would give me the power to rise again. I didn't know it yet, but my redemption had already begun. Hidden in a letter I hadn't opened. Written by a man long gone, my uncle. The one everyone said had died with nothing. But they were wrong. Because what he left behind wasn't just money. It was the key to everything I had lost. They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds need justice to heal. And that night, as the rain fell harder and the city faded into darkness, I made myself a silent promise I would get my life back. Not out of anger, not out of greed, but out of something far more dangerous purpose, and I had no idea then just how far that purpose would take me. Before everything fell apart, my life felt like something out of a dream, the kind of peaceful routine you never imagine losing. I woke up every morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of my kids laughing in the kitchen. Emily would be there, humming softly while making breakfast, her hair tied up, sunlight spilling across her face. She'd smile when she saw me, that soft, knowing smile that told me everything was right in the world. I used to believe that kind of happiness lasted forever. I was wrong. I worked at Coal Industries, one of the biggest corporate firms in New York. To me, it wasn't just a job, it was a purpose. I had started from the bottom, climbing my way up through late nights, missed vacations, and endless dedication. I believed in hard work and loyalty, in the idea that if you gave your best, the world would give it back. And for a while it did. My numbers were strong, my projects were praised, and I had earned the trust of everyone around me. And then there was Richard Cole, my boss, my mentor, and the man I admired most. Richard had that rare charm that made people believe in him instantly. Tall, confident, every word he spoke felt like it carried weight. He had built Coal Industries from nothing, turning it into a powerhouse. To me, he was the kind of man I wanted to be: sharp, ambitious, unstoppable. I saw him as a role model. I never realized he saw me as competition. Richard took a special interest in me from the start. He'd drop by my office, ask for my ideas, and sometimes stay late to discuss strategies. He made me feel like I was part of something greater, like I was his right-hand man. "You've got potential, James," he used to say, clapping me on the shoulder. "Stay loyal, and this company will be yours someday." Those words meant everything to me. I didn't know they were just bait. My wife, Emily, admired him too. She often told me how lucky I was to work for someone so visionary. Whenever we attended corporate events, Richard would charm the room, always polite, always smiling. And sometimes his compliments to Emily would linger a little too long. "You two make the perfect couple," he'd say, raising his glass. "James, you're a lucky man," I'd laugh it off. After all, Richard was married himself, a picture-perfect power couple. What harm could a little flattery do? Looking back now, I see it all differently. The small gestures, the casual glances, the way he'd always bring her name into conversations. "Emily has such good taste," he'd mention when I wore a new tie. Or, "Emily's advice really seems to ground you." It seemed harmless at first, even friendly. But deep down, he was studying my life, my strengths, my weaknesses, the very things that defined me. At home, life felt complete. Lily was 8, curious, full of energy, always asking questions about the world. Ethan was 5, quiet, gentle, the kind of kid who'd hand you a flower just to see you smile. Emily loved them more than anything, and she loved me, or so I believed. We weren't perfect, but we were happy. Every night, I'd come home exhausted, and she'd greet me with that tired but genuine look that said, "You made it through another day." That was all I needed. But somewhere between the boardroom and the dinner table, I started noticing little things. A missed call from Richard late at night. "Work emergency," he'd say. A few unplanned office trips Emily suddenly joined me on. "You said it's a family-friendly event, right?" she'd ask, smiling. And then there was the way Richard started dropping by our house uninvited, saying he was in the neighborhood. Once or twice I brushed it off, but it began happening too often to ignore. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing. Because that's what blind faith does. It covers the cracks before you can see them. I told myself I was overthinking, that Richard was just being kind, that Emily was just being polite. The truth is, I didn't want to believe anything else. In the office, my colleagues began treating me differently. Rumors whispered about how I was Richard's favorite. Some respected me for it. Others envied me. But what I didn't realize was that Richard was setting the stage, building a narrative slowly, carefully. One that would make my downfall believable when the time came. And through it all, I stayed loyal. I kept working harder, trying to prove myself and live up to Richard's expectations. I didn't see that every success I achieved made me more of a threat in his eyes. He wanted control over his company, over his image, and eventually, over everything I held dear. There's a certain irony in it all. The man I trusted most was the one quietly loosening the ground beneath my feet. And the woman I loved most was unknowingly, or perhaps willingly, helping him do it. Back then, I still believed life was fair, that good people win in the end. But I was about to learn the truth the hard way, that in a world run by power and greed, loyalty is a weakness and trust is a weapon. It started slowly, so quietly that I almost missed the first signs, the small cracks beneath the surface of a perfect life. At work, the tension began with whispers. A project I'd been developing for months, a merger proposal that could have taken the company to new heights, was suddenly being presented by Richard himself. I remember sitting in that conference room, watching him explain my strategy as if it had come from his own mind. My words, my numbers, my vision, stolen and polished with his charm. When he finished, the board applauded. Richard gave me a short glance, a half smile that cut deeper than any insult. He didn't need to say it. He wanted me to know he'd taken what was mine, and he could do it again. I told myself it was fine, that he was my boss, my mentor, and maybe it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the company succeeded. That's what loyal employees do, right? They sacrifice. They stay silent, but deep down something was changing. I began to see the game for what it really was, and I was losing. Weeks passed, and the distance between us grew colder. I noticed coworkers avoiding my gaze. Emails I used to be copied on stopped arriving. Meetings were held without me. My name began to fade from the projects I had built. And through it all, Richard smiled like a king watching his pawn slide off the board. At home, things weren't any better. Emily had changed. She was quieter, distracted. The woman who once greeted me at the door now barely looked up when I walked in. "You're late again?" she'd say, her tone sharp. "The kids already ate." When I tried to hold her hand, she'd pull away, claiming she was tired. Nights that used to be filled with laughter were now silent. The warmth was gone, replaced by something distant, something I couldn't name. I blamed work. I thought the stress was getting to us both. But the truth was, the poison had already begun to spread, from the boardroom into my home. One night, I stayed late at the office to finish a report. Around midnight, I realized I had left my phone at home. I called Emily from my desk phone, no answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Something inside me whispered that something was wrong. I packed up and drove home. The house was dark when I pulled up, except for the faint glow of lights from our bedroom window. I climbed the stairs quietly, each step heavier than the last. And then I heard it, laughter. Soft, familiar laughter. Her laughter. When I opened the door, the world stopped. There they were, Emily and Richard together, his hand on her face pale with shock when she saw me. Time froze. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the two people who had taken everything pure from my life. "James," she whispered, but the word meant nothing. I turned and walked out without a word. I didn't need to hear excuses. The truth was right there, raw, undeniable. In the days that followed, my world fell apart completely. Richard didn't just steal my wife, he made sure to take my career with her. I was accused of falsifying data, of taking bribes, of betraying the very company I helped build. It was a setup perfectly executed. My accounts were frozen, my name dragged through the mud. Reporters called, friends vanished, and Emily filed for divorce, claiming I'd been unstable. Richard's lawyers handled everything. I was painted as the villain in a story I didn't write. The custody battle was short. His influence, his money, they made sure I lost. I watched my kids walk away that day, their little hands gripping Emily's, not knowing that everything they'd been told about me was a lie. That was the day something inside me broke, the day the world went silent. For a while, I disappeared. The man I was, hardworking, hopeful, loyal, died quietly. I spent nights in cheap motels, staring at ceilings, wondering where it all went wrong. How could a man I trusted like a brother do this to me? How could the woman I loved let him? But even in darkness, fate has a way of whispering when you least expect it. A month later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. It was from a lawyer representing my late uncle's estate, a man I barely remembered. He had left me something. I didn't care at first, but curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I learned he had left behind a business trust worth $80 million. But there was a condition: to claim it, I had to rebuild. I had to prove that I was capable of standing again. At that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't just an inheritance. It was redemption. With that money, I built a new life under a different name. I invested, started a company, and watched it grow, quietly, strategically. The same people who once turned their backs on me started to notice again. And behind the scenes, I began to pull the strings that would expose Richard's corruption. Every document, every transaction, every lie, I had proof of it all. Months later, his empire began to crumble. Investigations, lawsuits, scandals, and then came the day we met face to face, the boardroom, the press, the end of his reign. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply placed the truth on the table and let it destroy him. "James," he said, voice cracking, "you set me up." I looked him in the eye and said, "No, Richard. You set yourself up the day you thought loyalty was weakness." He was escorted out, his name erased from the company he built. His wife left him. His fortune vanished. His face became a headline, a warning to others. As for me, I found peace. I reconnected with my kids. Emily reached out one day, tears in her voice, saying she was sorry. I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I no longer carried the weight of hate. Revenge had done its job, but forgiveness set me free. Now, when I look back, I don't see the man who lost everything. I see the man who rebuilt himself from ashes. The betrayal didn't end me, it defined me. They say betrayal breaks you, but what you rebuild after it defines who you truly are. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: revenge fades, but rebirth lasts forever.